Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers and for having me. I'm very happy to be here today and see you all after 3 years. As Pascal was saying, I slightly changed my paper, which was supposed to focus on mountains and the relation between earth sciences, geology especially, and visual arts during the second half of the 19th century. Geology and visual arts will still be the focus, but instead of the mountains, I decided to consider landscapes more generally, and that's because of some new findings of my researches that I will be glad to discuss with you. So I will analyze the production of a renewed earth science iconography during this period, and especially consider how earth science figurative influence figurative arts and the development of multiple visual languages. To do so, as an art historian, I will directly question the images. The chosen case study is that of the Savoyard painter Claude Hugard, so far rather unstudied, and especially his landscape paintings from the Mineralogy Museum of the École des Mines in Paris. This collaboration with the engineers and geologists influences the painter's production in the following years, showing the evolution of earth sciences, visual culture, and its dissemination during the second half of the century. By this time, earth sciences progress and also technical achievements led to a particularly broad and unparalleled scientific dissemination. For instance, through the proliferation of books and journals, almost always richly illustrated. After having analyzed the case of Hugard, I'll try to show how, from the learned institution and through different visual experimentations, earth sciences are by this time in search of their own visual language, and also what was the relation with landscape paintings. Landscape painting appears one of the preferred objects to transmit scientific knowledge, as a visual laboratory that is adapted to different aims and supports. So as I was saying, the starting points of my analysis are the mountain paintings for the École des Mines. Some of you already know that because this was my presentation in Varese, in IGEO 2019, but don't worry, I won't do the same presentation. I'll just make a short recap to move on towards the broad context of scientific dissemination and outside the École des Mines, as I was saying. So the paintings were realized between 1852 and 59, and they still decorate the staircase leading to the Mineralogy Museum. They are 4 allegories by the neoclassical painter Denis Abel de Puyol. You'll see just 3 of them. I'll show the 4th in some minutes. And these allegories are articulated in a sort of crescendo or symbolic ascension towards scientific knowledge. You see the first one, science enlightening the youth. Then you have the allegory of mineralogy and chemistry. And then you have France presenting its mineral ores, that is the modern results of science and techniques. And then we have the 10 landscapes by Claude Hugard, which mostly represents the French and Swiss Alps and the Pyrenees, but not only, as you can see. And Claude Hugard was a romantic landscape painter, originally from the Savoyard region, so familiar with the alpine milieu. The landscape are realized following the instructions of Dufresnoy, Pierre-Armand Dufresnoy, by the time the school's director, and Élie de Beaumont. Their correspondence clearly shows the double aim of the painted decoration, both decorative and scientific, enhancing also the work of mining engineers, such as the first geological map of France by Dufresnoy and de Beaumont under the direction of Professor Brochon de Villiers in 1841. While following their instructions to depict precise topographical portraits, Hugard tries to conjugate the requested scientific objectivity with the romantic aesthetics that he cherished, that of the sublime. and that we can also observe, for instance, in the particularly low point of view chosen by the painters, and that puts the observer in a sort of, let's say, learning position. So this staircase functions as a space-time device. We talked about space and time this morning. And this staircase is a sort of unicum in the French capital because the temporal dimension, especially, is expressed in a relatively new way. Concerning the space, it is entrusted to the landscape paintings. Time is represented by the allegorical paintings inspired to antiquity. The physical and conceptual center of the painted cycle is indeed the apotheosis of Denis Abel de Pujol, apotheosis of great men that distinguish themselves in geology and mineralogy, and you can recognize personality from the antiquity to the contemporary era. Here you have, for instance, Aristotle, Buffon, Cuvier, Dufresnoy himself, and de Saussure. De Saussure is a key figure since the points of view from which the mountains are represented are those that he already described in his Voyage dans les Alpes in the second half of the 18th century. Thus, the great men depicted by Pujol somehow inhabit the landscapes, in which the human presence is otherwise almost absent, according to the romantic conception of nature. Thus, this cycle not only represents the progress of earth sciences, but also their history and evolution through time, represented by the men that have contributed to writing this history. Within this process, landscape paintings, traditionally considered as a minor genre, is somehow rehabilitated by the progress of earth sciences, to which it is profoundly connected. It is not anymore possible to look at the landscape paintings without a stratigraphical glance. This expression, stratigraphical glance, is that of the art historian Pierre Watt, and it indicates how landscape become, I quote, a book telling the history of the earth, in which every strata of the soil corresponds to a temporal accumulation, so that after geology, landscape cannot be reduced to a spatial dimension that has to be perceived also in terms of time, of length, as the slow genesis of the world that could not anymore imagine as being accomplished in 7 days, end quote. So this attention for the chronological dimension related both to the history of the earth and that of the earth sciences appear in the later work of Claude Hugard, for whom the experience at the École marks a turning point. And we can see it, for instance, in his maybe most well-known painting, La Mer de Glace, painted in 1862, so a decade after the École des Mines. Here, Hugard reunites the quest for scientific objectivity with the romantic and picturesque aesthetics again. The extent and magnificence of nature is still expressed by the presence of the small human figures in the center, who are not insignificant because they are de Saussure and his team, directly painted after the engravings illustrating his rise of the Mont Blanc in 1787. The presence of these explorers and geologists, who already became protagonists of the history of earth sciences, contribute to write this history through images such as La Mer de Glace. Yet the attention of the painter is also focused on the rocks and the ice characterizing this landscape. The profound crevices on the foreground draw the observer downwards and inside the depicted space. Rocks are represented with an almost photographic precision, and the ice as well. Its faithful representation was indeed a challenge for the painters, and Hugard himself already painted the ice for the École des Mines, as you can see in La Grotte de Glace de l'Arberon. So we can compare the two paintings and see the difference. In La Grotte de Glace, the aim is rather to render the global impression and atmosphere than scientific objectivity for the ice and rocks representation. But through this case study, we see then how, rather fast, progress in the fields of earth sciences shape renewed landscape representations. But Hugard's interest in this question is even wider, and he collaborates with other engineers, geologists, and men of science beyond the École des Mines. Indeed, this experience gives him the chance to further integrate the broader scientific milieu of the French capital. Within this research perspective, I recently discovered the significant collaboration between Hugard and Louis Figuier in 1863. Figuier is the author of numerous books of scientific dissemination, often enriched by illustrations. In 1863, he publishes The Earth Before the Deluge, La Terre avant le déluge, while Hugard exposes at the Parisian painting salon of the same year 2 prehistoric landscapes, accompanied in the salon catalogue that you can see here by excerpts from Figuier's book. The landscapes represented the Jurassic and the Quaternary periods and were respectively populated by monstrous reptiles as the Ichthyosaurus and the Plesiosaurus, as you can maybe read, and pachyderms, also having monstrous shapes haunted by voracious and fearsome carnivores. These 2 paintings, whose location is still unknown and I have not yet seen, do not directly illustrate Figuier's book and were not painted after his demand. Here is the book's drawing illustration, corresponding to Hugard's painting. But it wasn't realized by Hugard, as you can see, but by Edouard Riou. So Hugard's initiative seems to witness his interest for earth sciences or for the ongoing scientific debates, and especially in these circumstances, the one concerning the age of the Earth, after the researches of Lyell and Darwin, and in France, those of Cuvier and Brongniart. And that question, the age of the Earth, also nourishes the stratigraphical glance, as well as this renewed chronological dimension in landscape paintings that I mentioned. On March 25th, 1863, Figuier writes to the president of the National Society of Fine Arts, Théophile Gautier. And he writes that, I hope that you will learn with satisfaction that I tried to give to the arts all the means to reproduce scenes of the primitive world. A meritorious painter, Monsieur Hugard, author of the Mer de Glace, who was honorably exposed at the latest Salon, is now terminating 2 large landscapes representing the Jurassic and the Quaternary periods of our globe. I gave him instructions to choose the animal and the vegetal species, and our illustrious geologist, Monsieur de Beaumont, has accepted to examine the final work and to suggest some modifications. Monsieur the Count of Nieuwerkerk went last week to see the 2 paintings, and he appeared responsive to the idea of showing to the nowadays painters a completely new source for picturesque reproductions. So these excerpts clearly show the nature of the relation existing between figurative arts and earth sciences, as well as the collaboration involving their respective major actors. Hugard's networks also appear more precise. For instance, Élie de Beaumont is again mentioned, and these artists seem to be well inserted and appreciated among the scientific community, especially after the École des Mines experience, and apparently also thanks to the Mer de Glace success. Furthermore, Figuier expresses the interest and the necessity of new picturesque, as he says, scientific representations. Their potential of scientific dissemination also shows a new approach to earth sciences communication. And within a decade, these new images overstep the wall of a learned scholarly institution, such as the École des Mines, and open up towards a broader public and rapidly changing society. A last example that I would like to mention to further explore the research perspective and better contextualize these case studies are other books and journals of scientific dissemination, whose number considerably increased during the second half of the century. We can think, of course, about Jules Verne, Voyage au centre de la Terre, illustrated by Edouard Riou. So you can see that it's the same artist that was working with Louis Figuier. The same year, 1864, Georges Sand, that was mentioned yesterday, publishes Laura, Voyage in the Crystal. But there is another case study of which I would like to talk, this one. In 1867, so in the same years, more or less, Louis-Laurent Simonin, mining engineer and also author of numerous dissemination books, publishes The Underground Life of Ore Mines and Miners, La vie souterraine ou les mines et les mineurs, with an extremely rich and varied iconographic apparatus, including mineral samples, landscapes, miners at works, tools, maps, etc. Simonin explicitly affirms in the introduction that the book's aim is not only to interest, but also to educate the reader, and he states that he addressed himself to artists every time that it was necessary, because it's essential, I quote, to talk to the eyes through images. And this book will be diffused abroad, for instance, in Italy, some years after, through the journal La Scienza per Tutti, Science for Everyone, founded in 1879. From its earlier numbers, La Scienza per Tutti dedicates a special section to the Italian translation of Simonin's book and reproduces its images, not all the images, but a lot. So here's the first section dedicated to Simonin's book with the subtitle, as you can see, Geological Chatting, the Carboniferous Period. This first section is not yet a translation of the book, but rather a sort of introduction to geology in general. And it's the only section of this journal dedicated to earth sciences. So in the article, we can read that the Earth allowed man to discover the treasures in its depths and let him know with its fossils that it had lived a very long life, repeatedly changing its aspect and shape. Man finally discovered the principle that constitutes today the basis of geology. A science that, now founded on solid basis, can become as popular as physics or other natural sciences, since, says the author, a science only based on speculation and unverified hypotheses, it could be a science, but cannot be popularized. It's not yet ready. We can thus see how the possibility of dissemination appear as a new angle to consider sciences in general, and how geology seems to have established its identity within the field of dissemination and popularization. The rest of the short article describes the image that illustrates it, that is, again, a prehistorical landscape. Above, you have that from the book of Simonin, and then you see how it's reproduced in the journal. Landscape illustrations are very often present in such articles dedicated to geology, and we can notice the same in the contemporary French journal La Science Populaire, Popular Sciences, founded in 1880, that is 1 year after La Scienza per Tutti. And in its first number immediately appear a section entitled Air, Earth and Water, Description of the Main Marvels of the Globe and the Most Curious Natural Phenomena. And it is also illustrated by a landscape, again, of the Carboniferous period. So for now, my hypothesis is that from Hugard's prehistorical landscapes, these kind of images are the favorite ones when it comes to captivate the reader and the observer, and even the visitor of a museum, because they express the current debates and researches and really embody and visualize the stratigraphical glance that we mentioned. On the other hand, landscapes are familiar representations for the broader public, that is the one composed by non-specialists. Landscapes can be associated with paintings, of course, but also with postcards and photographs, and they still express the already visually known and widespread romantic aesthetics that somehow is still present in these prehistorical landscapes, silent, verdant, majestic, unexplored, and not yet populated by humans, but by the most curious and dangerous animals. As a conclusion, we can observe how in this moment, that is the decade between 1860s and 1880s, it is a moment of transition, of experiments, It's a laboratory in which different actors, such as artists, engineers, geologists, scientific disseminators, are all in quest of a new visual language capable to express and transmit scientific knowledge related to earth sciences. These visual experimentations, on the one hand, contribute to write the history of those sciences, and on the other hand, visually translates knowledge, and the proliferation of different kinds of images also embodies the richness of the researches by the time. Finally, these phenomena happen on a very different scales in a rather short time. From the museum of the learned institution, the École de Mines, to different individual personal researches and collaboration, and to the much broader scale of scientific dissemination that still deserve to be further studied. That's what I'm trying to do. So through this varied scale, we can observe the production and overlap of different visual languages, from the monumental decoration to the more ephemeral dimension of these journal illustrations. Their simultaneous existence shows how geology is in search of its own visual vocabulary, which is developed from the richness and variety of this visual production. And it also shows how geology, while building up its new codes of representation, contributed to the elaboration of our renewed scientific visual culture and to our renewal of landscape painting itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddalena. So we have plenty of time for discussion, so it's exceptional. Jacques?
Okay, thank you. So a very nice presentation. I just mentioned en passant that maybe it would have been fair to indicate that the recent information on all the painting in the Grand Escalier had been rediscovered when my wife was the director of the School of Mine, of the Museum of the School of Mine. But this is not my question. This this picture. We had, of course, identified all the people in the lower row, you know, from Haui, Cuvier, De Saussure, Dufresnoy, and so on. But did you identify the people in the top row, either to the left of the allegory or to the right? You know, all these gods from antiquity, especially the guy with the mustache, which is just below the crown, you know.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. I know that we talked about this in Paris Confrigio reunion last year in September. I didn't insist on this allegorical painting because it was the presentation was more focused on landscapes. And I just mentioned the Saussure to establish the link between allegories and landscapes. But I don't know actually, because I haven't studied in depth these personalities. I haven't tried to identify them yet.
No, so it would be very interesting to know, especially the guy to the extreme left, you know. And besides, I think that the guy in the mustache, for me, I always thought this was Napoleon III.
This one?
Because it looks very much like that. But the guy, this one, yeah, is a bit uncertain, but most especially the guy to the extreme left, you know, with a white hair. I think that nearby you have Newton, most probably, you know, it looks, but this one, I really don't know who is. And if you can find who is, so you would have made a real progress to our knowledge.
Thank you very much for your remark, because now we're all here and maybe we can discuss and discover all together who they are. No, there are no women.
Thank you so much, Maddalena, for your inspiring talk. I like it very much and want to make a comparison from my view on this image, as I have read a lot about the early alpinism. And if we think about also Radwig's book, So if you see on the right side, if you have these two images to compare them, you have on the right side, then we have the knowledge in this time that these mountains you can get on the summit as many did it, Saussure and other. And to be on the summit, this means that science is on the summit. And if you look at this allegory, you have also, I see some clouds, maybe I see not right from this distance. The allegory is over the cloud. This is the tradition, but also these people are in their height. So I see some connection between this image. But this is, you know, I have been there in this house and in this staircase, but I do not remember as well. Yeah, so maybe it's totally wrong, but this is my association. What would you say?
I'll say here you have the mountain, then you have the allegory of chemistry and mineralogy, and then you have these summits and Olympus of great men who are in the sky. So it's like a persecution. And while looking at this painting, you're going up a staircase. So there is this idea of progress in space and time, which are also the space and time of the visit. So for sure, there's a link between them. Maybe now you can see it clear that it's not easy to take photographs of this.
Well, this is a comment. I think you are right to stress the importance of what you call visual language. And I think it has already been there, but sometimes it is hidden. But now I think we stress again on the importance of the visual language. For instance, the tutorials in the internet. And you may know that there is also a journal in biology, the Journal of Visualized Experiments, and so on. So there are many examples today that stress the importance of this language before the words, the visual language.
Thank you very much. Lovely talk. And I have to say, I've just been painting, so this is lovely to see artistic representation. But I wonder, have you investigated Claude Hugard's studio? Where did he actually paint these things? Did he paint them on site? Are there any sketches, notebooks to give you some information, particularly about these lovely gentlemen up in the clouds?
Okay, thank you very much. Claude Hugard was my starting point from this talk, and the link between really his first experience with engineers, and then through his case, we can move to the broader context of journals and books. And I've been studying it. It's really, I haven't found much about him. For the paintings in the École, he went on site. There are letters. He was sent on site in the mountain, in the Alps, in the Pyrenees, in Sicily to paint the Etna. Not in Scotland, not in Iceland, because you have the Fingal Cave, and you also have a geyser in Iceland. Hugard, what I would like to do is to take a look, if I can find it, at what was in his library, because for example, we know that he didn't went to Scotland, but probably referred to this kind of pre-existent iconography. And I haven't found sketches for these paintings. His works are nowadays mostly dispersed in private collections. So it's, yeah. Thank you.